So now if you look at the bottom of flowchart number 3, you'll see that it includes a lot of information. And so I apologize, I just couldn't figure out a better way to explain what happens here. At this point in the committee meeting, we're assuming that all of the draft resolutions are being worked on, right? Most of the delegates at this point will know about their own draft resolution, or the part about their draft resolution that they wrote and they worked on, maybe with others, but they don't know much about the other draft resolutions. Now, if you've been active throughout the conference, if you've been staying active, moving about, you'll have some knowledge of the other draft resolutions, but you're not going to know them in any detail because you're really focusing on getting your own draft resolution down. But you can be intermittently looking around and talking to other delegates and see what else is going on. Now, in order for delegates to learn about the other draft resolutions, there's this question-answer period that is referred to by some as the authors panel, right? This is where the sponsors of the draft resolution come to the front of the room and explain what their draft resolution includes. And now one of the things I should discuss is the difference between sponsors and signatories. A sponsor of a resolution is somebody who has contributed to the resolution in a significant way, they participated in a significant way, and they want to see the resolution pass. Then there are also what are called signatories to a draft resolution. The signatories aren't necessarily saying that they agree with the draft resolution. By becoming a signatory, they're simply saying that they agree that it should get a vote. Okay, so you've got sponsors and signatories, but the sponsors are the main contributors to the draft resolution. So they go up, they explain the draft resolution, and then, if time permits, delegates who are in the committee who aren't up in front, talking about it, they're allowed to ask questions. And so you can ask questions about it. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot of drama surrounding the authors panel. And so we're going to devote an entire video to the authors panel alone. We'll talk about getting on the authors panel. We'll talk about how to avoid getting pushed off the authors panel, because sometimes what we've experienced in the past is even though our delegates will be one of the main contributors, you'll see schools, sometimes prestigious schools, kind of get together and vote to sort of push somebody off the authors panel. It's kind of messed up and frustrating when you've worked so hard to get something done. And then also a discussion about the types of questions that you should ask during an authors panel. But for now, we're going to let that go. Although it can vary at each conference, when a motion to introduce draft resolutions passes, usually at the discretion of the chair, the authors panel will be set up, right? It'll be established. The length of the authors panel will usually be up to the chair, but usually there's some dialogue between the chair and delegates as to how long they want the authors panel to last, right? Usually the chair will wait until all the draft resolutions have been introduced and approved, and then each of the draft resolutions will be presented successively, right? So draft resolution 1.1, then 1.2, 1.3. You can actually motion, so let's just leave it at that. They're usually presented in successively, sometimes by the way that they were submitted to the chair. At some conferences, the chair will broadcast the actual draft resolution on a screen in front of the committee, and 4 or 5 sponsors, right? The delegates primarily responsible for the content of the draft resolution. Again, though, it's not always, sometimes it's more complicated than that. The sponsors will come to the front of the room. Now, sometimes the sponsors will just read the draft resolution, okay? Sometimes they'll explain the draft resolution. The order in which the sponsors speak is arranged ahead of time by the sponsors, and when they're not just reading it, so usually what delegates will do is if you focused on a particular part of writing one part of a draft resolution, that's the part you'll explain. Somebody else, if they focus on a different part, that's the part that they'll explain. After the draft resolution is read or explained, then delegates have an opportunity to ask questions. right? So they're done explaining it, and then if there's time permitting, they'll allow for questions from people who are in the committee but not on the panel. And we'll discuss different strategies for the kind of questions you ask in a later video. Now, to be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely clear what happens at this stage, right? When it comes to the reading of the draft resolutions, I get the hell out. It is so boring, right, to just see 4 different draft resolutions read. Then I'll go to another committee and see if something more interesting is happening. If nothing is interesting is happening, that's time for me to get some coffee. That's time for me to grade some papers. That's time for me to check on Facebook, go back to my hotel room, whatever, because I'm not going to sit there and listen to it. It's just boring. So unless I know that one of our delegates is going to be on the authors panel, and then I'll stick around. But outside of that, I get the hell out. After the draft resolutions are presented, delegates are usually milling about, talking about the draft resolution and trying to build support. Now, I'm not sure if how chairs handle this. Technically, for that to happen, somebody should have to motion for an unmoderated caucus, right? But sometimes the chairs just do it at their own discretion. So it's very much, it depends on the chair themselves. In some cases, now that everyone has heard them all, a delegate might agree to support a particular draft resolution if it's amended in some way. So let's say your draft resolution, you got a delegate from who's been working on with a different group. They walk over, they're like, hey, I really like your guys' draft resolution, and I would definitely vote for it. But could you guys change this one part? Or could you add this one part? I think it'd be really important. That's the kind of negotiations that can go on. If it's something that you think is really bad for your draft resolution, you can say no. But if all the sponsors of the draft resolution don't have a problem with the amendment, they can write up the amendment and then give it to the chair before you go into voting bloc. And voting bloc is what happens on flowchart 4, so we'll talk about that in a second. But before the committee goes into voting bloc, if all the sponsors are like, hey, that's actually a good idea, or hey, that improves our draft resolution, or hey, we just want to get more support and we don't give a damn one way or another about this amendment, so let's stick it in. All they have to do is they submit it to the chair, and the chair will automatically amend the draft resolution and include it into the draft resolution. These are called friendly amendments. These are called friendly amendments. Okay, now, when the friendly amendments are submitted to the chair, like I say, there's no vote is necessary. They just change it automatically. Now, if one or more of the sponsors disagree with the amendment, then the draft resolution is not automatically modified. It has to be put to a vote. And it's going to be one of the first things that's voted on in voting bloc. These are referred to as unfriendly amendments. Right? And it can also be that if some people want to make an amendment to a draft resolution and none of the sponsors agree to it, this is going to be an unfriendly amendment. But again, these unfriendly amendments have to be submitted to the chair before voting bloc for them to be voted on. Otherwise, the chairs won't accept it. Now, at some point during the deliberations, the chair will ask for points or motions. Now, if a delegate motions for an unmoderated caucus and it passes, then deliberations will continue. Everybody will keep walking around discussing deliberations. And then when that ends, the chair will again ask, are there any points or motions on the floor? At that point, the chair is really waiting for somebody to motion to end debate. If the committee is ready to vote on the draft resolutions, then a delegate will motion to close debate. So if you're Cameroon and you're making that motion, I don't have my placard with me right now, but you'll say, thank you, honorable chair and fellow delegates, right? Cameron moves to close debate. For this to pass, it requires a 2/3 vote. But as you'll see on the flow chart, this motion usually passes because at this point of the conference, people are sick of talking about the topic, right? They're ready to move on to another topic. They're ready to be done with it. So as noted on flowchart 1, this rarely fails, right? And if the motion passes, the next motion that's going to be proposed is going into voting bloc. And that's where we're going to continue with the next video on flowchart number 4, voting block.